Today, Star Trek is recognized as one of the most influential franchises in television history. Its characters, starships, and ideas shaped modern science fiction and inspired generations of viewers, scientists, engineers, and storytellers. But behind the polished final product was a far messier reality. Long before the series became a cultural phenomenon, it struggled with technical limitations, budget problems, network interference, and countless behind-the-scenes complications that almost prevented it from ever reaching audiences. Many of the show's most famous moments were born not from perfection, but from improvisation, compromise, and creative survival. Entire concepts were altered or erased before airing. Scenes were changed, characters redesigned, and production flaws carefully hidden from viewers. What audiences eventually saw was only the cleaned-up version of a much more chaotic process. Filming the original Star Trek series was incredibly demanding. Producing nearly 180 episodes across several years required exhausting schedules that often stretched to 16 or 18 hours a day. Cast and crew members worked under constant pressure, racing against time and budget restrictions. Even decades later, actors from later Star Trek series described the workload as overwhelming. Kate Mulgrew, who played Captain Janeway in Voyager, once noted that the role was so demanding that the originally cast actor quit only days into filming. The long shooting hours created unusual situations on set. Quiet dialogue scenes were sometimes filmed in the middle of the night after the actors had already spent an entire day working. LeVar Burton, who portrayed Geordi LaForge in The Next Generation, occasionally took brief naps during filming while wearing his visor. Because many scenes placed him silently in the background, he could close his eyes without audiences noticing. Years later, Burton ironically became known for narrating relaxing sleep stories for meditation apps. Behind the cameras, creator Gene Roddenberry maintained a strong influence over the cast and the direction of the show. While there were frequent tensions involving contracts, royalties, and creative disagreements, Roddenberry often encouraged actors to shape their characters in personal ways. Jonathan Frakes, who played Commander Riker, worked closely with Roddenberry to create the calm, confident personality that eventually defined the character. Some of the show's most recognizable features also hit embarrassing production realities. The famous sliding doors aboard the Enterprise, for example, looked futuristic on screen thanks to the iconic whoosh sound added during editing. In reality, the doors were extremely loud mechanical props operated manually by stagehands. They produced harsh clanking noises that interrupted filming and drowned out dialogue. Actors learned to pause their lines whenever doors opened or closed so editors could later remove the unwanted sound and replace it with smoother audio effects. Once viewers notice this timing pattern, it becomes impossible to ignore. Even makeup and costume elements created problems. Between the first and second seasons of The Next Generation, Michael Dorn's original Worf forehead prosthetic mysteriously disappeared. Nobody at Paramount ever discovered who stole it. Some suspected crew members took souvenirs because they feared the show would not continue. The loss forced the makeup department to redesign Worf's appearance, contributing to the changing look of Klingon cranial ridges throughout the franchise. The origins of Star Trek itself were equally uncertain. When Gene Roddenberry first pitched the show to NBC, William Shatner was not the intended captain. The original lead was Jeffrey Hunter, a respected Hollywood actor who played Captain Christopher Pike in the first pilot episode, The Cage. Hunter's portrayal was thoughtful, restrained, and philosophical, matching Roddenberry's initial vision for the series. However, Hunter eventually left the project. Some reports claimed his wife disliked the idea of television work, while others suggested he simply did not connect with the role. Whatever the reason, his departure completely changed the direction of the show. William Shatner stepped into the role and brought a far more energetic and charismatic style. With Shatner as Captain Kirk, the tone shifted dramatically toward action, confidence, and adventure. Tragically, Jeffrey Hunter died only a few years later at age 42, never witnessing the enormous impact Star Trek would eventually achieve. Spock also nearly looked very different from the character audiences came to love. Early production notes described him with reddish skin and a much more unsettling alien appearance. Roddenberry originally wanted Spock to appear almost demonic or supernatural, but television technology created a problem. In the 1960s, most viewers still watched black and white television sets. Red makeup would appear extremely dark on monochrome screens, changing the intended effect entirely. To solve the issue, designers switched to a softer greenish-yellow complexion that appeared lighter on black and white televisions while still suggesting something alien. Ironically, by the time Star Trek aired widely in color, the effect was so subtle that many viewers barely noticed it. Instead, Spock's pointed ears became the defining feature of his appearance. Another iconic element of Star Trek emerged entirely because of financial limitations: the transporter. Today, teleportation is one of the franchise's most famous concepts. But originally, the crew was supposed to travel to planets using shuttlecraft. That plan required expensive landing sequences and detailed visual effects for every episode. The production simply could not afford it. The solution became the transporter effect. By filming sparkling particles against a dark background and reversing the footage, editors created the illusion of matter dissolving and reforming elsewhere. What started as a cheap workaround unexpectedly became one of science fiction's most memorable inventions. Decades later, scientists and physicists would discuss teleportation theories partly inspired by the show's imaginative concept. The series itself nearly failed before it even aired. NBC rejected the original pilot, The Cage, describing it as too intellectual and lacking excitement. Executives also felt uncomfortable with Majel Barrett's female first officer character, believing audiences would not accept a woman in such authority on television at the time. One of the show's most historically important contributions came through Nichelle Nichols, who portrayed Lieutenant Uhura. During the 1960s, seeing a black woman in a respected, professional leadership role on mainstream television was groundbreaking. Uhura was not a servant or background figure. She was an essential officer aboard the Enterprise. After the first season, Nichols considered leaving the series for Broadway opportunities. Before finalizing her decision, she attended an NAACP event where Martin Luther King Jr. personally asked her to stay. He explained that her role carried enormous cultural importance because black audiences, especially children, finally saw someone who looked like them represented with dignity, intelligence, and authority in a futuristic setting. That conversation changed Nichols' mind completely. She remained on the show, later describing the encounter as one of the most meaningful moments of her life. Leonard Nimoy also struggled with his role in the beginning. He worried that Spock's unusual appearance might reduce him to novelty performances for the rest of his career. More importantly, the character demanded a completely different acting style. Spock suppressed emotion and relied heavily on restraint, forcing Nimoy to rethink his natural instincts as a performer. As audiences embraced the character, Nimoy's relationship with Spock gradually evolved. His two autobiographies reflected this transformation perfectly. The first was titled I Am Not Spock. Years later, he published a second book called I Am Spock. One of the most controversial moments in television history occurred on November 22, 1968, when Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura shared an interracial kiss. At the time, NBC feared backlash from Southern television stations and pressured production to soften the scene by making the kiss appear forced through alien mind control. William Shatner and Nichelle Nichols reportedly sabotaged alternate takes where they avoided direct contact, ensuring the usable version would remain the genuine kiss. The scene aired successfully and became one of television's most powerful cultural moments. Nichols later recalled receiving letters from viewers who said the scene challenged their personal prejudices and changed how they viewed race. Despite its growing cultural influence, Star Trek struggled badly in ratings during its original run. NBC repeatedly considered cancellation. In response, fans organized one of television's earliest major letter-writing campaigns. Without internet or social media, supporters flooded NBC with petitions and letters demanding renewal. Their efforts succeeded twice, helping secure a third season. Although the final season suffered from reduced funding and poor scheduling, it pushed the series past the episode count required for syndication. That ultimately saved the franchise. Once reruns began airing regularly, Star Trek found a massive new audience and transformed into a worldwide phenomenon. Even the legendary USS Enterprise concealed hidden flaws. The 11-foot filming model looked beautifully detailed on camera, but only on the surfaces audiences would actually see. The underside remained unfinished, rough, and partially unpainted because no scenes required those angles. Production teams simply lacked the time and money to complete areas invisible to viewers. Another famous misconception involved the phrase, "Beam me up, Scotty." Though widely associated with Star Trek, the exact line was never spoken in the original series. Kirk instead used variations such as "Scotty, beam me up" or "Beam us up." Over time, popular memory reshaped the dialogue into something more iconic than the original wording. The show also relied heavily on recycled costumes and props. Alien wardrobes often came from old Hollywood productions stored in studio warehouses. Roman robes, Western outfits, and medieval costumes were redesigned into futuristic clothing for distant civilizations. Clever modifications allowed the production team to create the illusion of a vast universe on an extremely limited budget. The phaser weapons followed a similar pattern. Early versions were built from toy ray guns already sitting in studio inventory. Prop designers repainted and modified them into futuristic sidearms. Though slightly plastic-looking up close, proper lighting and sound design made them believable on screen. Remarkably, these fictional energy weapons later influenced real-world discussions about directed energy technology. Even comedic episodes created serious production difficulties. The Trouble with Tribbles introduced the famous furry creatures that multiplied uncontrollably aboard the Enterprise. The Tribbles look harmless, but under hot studio lights, their synthetic fur generated intense static electricity. Props stuck to actors, costumes, cameras, and furniture, while crew members received small electric shocks throughout filming. At its core, Star Trek began with Gene Roddenberry's simple dream of creating a science fiction adventure series inspired by naval stories and westerns. He described the concept as wagon train to the stars, blending frontier exploration with futuristic technology. Influences included classic science fiction literature, naval adventures like Horatio Hornblower, and films such as Forbidden Planet. Roddenberry initially called the ship the SS Yorktown before eventually developing the USS Enterprise. The first intended captain was Robert April, later replaced by Christopher Pike, and finally James T. Kirk. The project gained support through Desilu Productions, led by Lucille Ball. Although Ball reportedly knew little about science fiction, she played a major role in helping secure production funding. Her decision to support Star Trek became one of the most important investments in television history. The visual style of the series also depended heavily on talented designers working under impossible constraints. Matt Jeffries designed the USS Enterprise and many of its interiors, creating a practical and believable spacecraft environment. The famous Jeffries tubes, later named throughout the franchise, honored his contributions. Costume